Have you ever been pushed out of a seat you paid for? Have you ever suffered in silence because you believed that throwing yourself into an argument won't change anything? And what if that moment happened right in the sky, in the midst of over 200 people who had no idea what was going on? That night, a black female CEO, Naomi Caldwell, was forced out of her first-class seat because she didn't fit the bill. But that moment of resignation left her with an unexpected choice: bow her head and accept her fate, or stand up to defend the truth, even if it meant turning the system against her. If it were you, what would you do when people look down on you because of your skin color, your gender, or your background? Would you keep quiet? Or would you let your pride speak for itself? Let this story take you back to the times you were pushed aside, and ask yourself, how did you respond to that injustice? If you are ready to embark on this emotional, breathtaking, and healing journey, like, share, and subscribe to the channel so we can start the story now. He thought that a uniform with 4 yellow stripes on the shoulders was enough to decide where a black woman should sit. The thought crossed Naomi Caldwell's mind as she stood in the narrow first-class aisle. One hand still held her boarding pass, clearly marked 1A. The other gently gripped the strap of the brown laptop bag that had accompanied her for years. The cold white light from the cabin ceiling cast shadows that stretched longer and tighter in that moment of silence. Across from her was Captain Grant Huxley, the captain of SkyContinental Airlines Flight SC 217 from Houston to Washington, D.C. He was tall, broad-shouldered, and carried himself with an air of authority, as if the entire plane were his personal domain. His silver hair was cropped, his jaw was square, 2 shiny metal wings on his chest. But the most disturbing thing was not his appearance but his gaze, a gaze that swept over her as if she were a misplaced object. Behind Naomi, the passengers lined up patiently, but their eyes wavered. Some avoided her, afraid of trouble. Some looked at her with pity. And some, consciously or unconsciously, glanced at Captain Huxley as if trying to fight off discomfort. Naomi was familiar with that look. She had seen it all her life. Naomi took a small breath. No one could hear. She's 56. Her skin is a deep brown, her hair pulled back in a bun, streaks of silver glinting under the cabin lights. She's the CEO of Caldwell Mobility, one of the fastest-growing logistics tech companies on the Gulf Coast. She works closely with carriers, airports, and large corporations across the country. She's known in the industry as a quiet person, but her words are never taken lightly. And in addition to her CEO job, she has another responsibility: Federal Transportation Safety Commissioner, a part-time position appointed by the President. She is responsible for inspecting, evaluating, and recommending improvements to safety procedures in the aviation and rail industries. She has spent her career proving that people like her are not only good enough, but also strong enough to stand on the same ground as everyone else. But today she just wanted to be a regular passenger on a Friday night flight. She had a big speech to give tomorrow morning before a Senate committee, a speech she had been preparing for most of the week. Her mind was tired, her heart was pounding. All she wanted to do was sit down in seat 1A, a quiet spot near the wall where she could open her laptop and read over a few paragraphs. But as the plane doors closed and passengers began to find their seats, Captain Grant Huxley stepped out of the cockpit. He didn't smile. He didn't greet anyone. He just looked around as if he were hunting for something he had misplaced. His eyes stopped on Naomi. Naomi sensed it immediately. Not that she was anything to look at. She was wearing a simple navy blazer, a cream crew neck sweater underneath, black slacks, no flashy jewelry except for an old leather watch. She looked like a tired office lady at the end of a week, which she was. But in the eyes of someone accustomed to seeing young white businessmen and first-class luxury, perhaps she looked not quite right. That was what she clearly felt when Captain Huxley spoke. "Ma'am," he said, his voice even and cold. "May I ask where your ticket is?" Naomi held up the boarding pass calmly. "I have it." He glanced at her quickly, then at her name tag. Caldwell. He frowned slightly, as if the name didn't belong on the list of CEOs he knew. Your seat is one, and Naomi nodded. Huxley didn't say there must be a system error. He didn't say, let me check the manifest. He didn't say, let me call the stewardess. He just said one sentence without any attempt to hide anything. That seat is not for you. The words weren't loud, but they hit Naomi's ears as clearly as the clang of metal in the cargo hold. She stood up straight, her eyes not avoiding. What do you mean? Naomi asked, her voice soft but sharp as a velvet-covered knife. Captain Huxley put his hands in his belt and took a breath. That seat is reserved for priority passengers. A special passenger is boarding. You will have to move. Behind Naomi, several people immediately looked down at their phones, pretending not to hear. She stood still, not moving. She had lived more than half her life and had experienced too many moments like this, when others thought they had the right to determine her worth. When she walked into a meeting room and everyone thought she was an assistant. When she sat in the chair of the chairman in a meeting with partners and people asked, will the chairman come later? Naomi was still breathing evenly. Her heart rate was unchanged. She has practiced it. I paid over $3,000 for this seat, Naomi said, and I needed to work on my way to Washington. That is irrelevant, Huxley replied, his tone becoming more severe. We reserve the right to adjust seating for operational reasons. A heavy silence passed between the two. Then a "excuse me" rang out. The voice of flight attendant Paula Green, a white woman in her mid-40s with a gentle face but tired eyes as if she had been through a week of overwork. Paula came to Naomi's side, her voice lowered apologetically. Ma'am, I'm really sorry, but the system just reported that your seat is faulty. We have to move you to another seat. The way Paula said it, Naomi knew Paula wasn't the problem. This woman was just caught between doing the right thing and keeping her job. Naomi swallowed lightly. System error, she asked, or is it how you define priority? Paula blushed. Ma'am, Captain Huxley interjected. Mrs. Caldwell, you are slowing down the boarding process. Please cooperate. A male passenger standing behind Naomi, wearing a suit and with graying hair, said in a low voice loud enough for Naomi to hear, "Just get it over with, ma'am. No trouble." Naomi turned. Her eyes passed over the man, then returned to the captain. She understood this. Sometimes silence is a powerful choice. But other times, silence means allowing others to walk all over you and people like you. Naomi thought quickly. She could protest right there. She could call her supervisor, demand an explanation from the airline, demand her seat be kept. But she also knew a scene of an argument in the cabin could be interpreted a dozen different ways, and people like her, black female, elderly, didn't usually benefit from shortened clips. She didn't want anyone to take that story the wrong way. Not tonight. Naomi took a deep breath. She loosened her grip on the boarding pass. All right, she said. Just take me to the right city. There's more to Washington than a chair. Captain Huxley nodded with obvious satisfaction. Naomi adjusted her bag strap, turned around, pulled her small suitcase, and walked down the aisle. Each step made a light tap on the thick carpet. Some avoided her eyes. Some looked at her with pity. Some looked at her as if they had just won some strange card game. Naomi looked straight ahead. It's something she's practiced all her life. When they got to economy, Paula took her to row 33, the middle seat right next to the toilet. The smell of food lingered around. A big man moved over to make room, the smell of beer still lingering on his shirt. Naomi sat down. She placed her bag beside her feet and opened her laptop. She did not feel defeated. She felt a pang, a weariness, a little sadness that this could happen to someone like her, no matter how hard she tried. But more than that, she felt something else. One question clearly comes to mind. If this happened to another woman, not me, would they have any chance of being treated fairly? Naomi closed her laptop and leaned her head back in her chair. The plane shook slightly as it pushed back from the gate, and she knew tonight's story wasn't over. No, this is just the beginning. Naomi had not been sitting in seat 33B for long when the flight attendant's voice came from the cabin speaker, soft but clear. "We're closing the passenger compartment doors and preparing for departure. Please fasten your seat belts." She pulled her seatbelt and heard the familiar click. A moment later, the lights dimmed and the cabin became dim with only thin strips of light along the overhead bins. The remaining passengers hurried to secure their luggage, children were fussing, and a few people were grumbling about the nearly half-hour delay. Naomi leaned her head back against the seat. The smell of plastic clothes and leftover fast food from the previous flight assaulted her nostrils, an unpleasant mix but one she could live with. She had flown economy class for years, carrying hopes and a few old savings written on handwritten notes. She exhaled softly, then looked straight into the darkness ahead. A man sitting to her right, a large man in a faded t-shirt, swayed. He spoke softly, his Texas accent thick. "Sorry, ma'am. I know I'm a little broad. If I'm encroaching on your space, just let me know." Naomi turned and smiled slightly. "It's okay. I'm fine." The young woman on the left, maybe in her early 20s, was holding a little boy about 3 years old. Her hair was a little disheveled and there were dark circles under her eyes. She patted the boy's back and apologized to those around her for crying. Naomi leaned over and asked softly, "Did she go far?" The girl nodded. "I took him home to meet his father. I was a bit worried because he wasn't used to flying." Naomi smiled, her eyes softening. "There's no familiar kid. But it's okay. I believe so." The young woman nodded gratefully. She could see the tension in her eyes. She knew the feeling, tired, afraid of disturbing others and trying to stay calm. The plane began to taxi. Naomi heard the increasing noise of the engines, the slight vibration of the fuselage, the unstable sound of the propeller blades outside. Then she looked up. A very light but painful feeling passed through, because at this time she should be sitting in 1A, opening her laptop, rereading a few paragraphs of the important speech she would give tomorrow morning. She needed the quiet to review each word. She needed the freedom to think. But instead, she was sitting in the middle of row 33, squeezed between two strangers on a flight filled with fatigue weighing on her shoulders. But it wasn't the loss of her job that bothered her. She was CEO, a job didn't make her any less valuable. It was the certainty in Captain Huxley's eyes, as if he'd decided from the start that she wasn't a good fit for 1A. She looked at her hands, resting on her thighs. The small veins on the backs of her hands were visible from years of hard work. Hands that had signed big contracts, shaken hands with politicians, and touched hundreds of aviation safety research papers. Hands that had led a company from a handful of employees to a large logistics tech company. Yet in the eyes of a man like Huxley, that hand was nothing. Naomi closed her eyes for a moment to regulate her breathing. The plane picked up speed and lifted off. There was a familiar tilt. As the wheels retracted into the fuselage, Naomi opened her eyes. The entire economy cabin seemed to sink beneath the plane, leaving Houston in a dim square below. She loved this moment, the moment when everything on the ground became smaller and the sky grew wider. But tonight her heart was not as open as usual. As the plane reached a stable altitude, the flight attendants began serving drinks. Naomi asked for a glass of cold water. Her voice was gentle, like someone who was used to speaking to staff, not with pressure, but with respect. Paula Green, the head flight attendant Naomi had met earlier, came out from the front. Even though she had to go down to help in the economy cabin, Paula maintained a very professional demeanor. As she approached row 33, Paula saw Naomi. Her eyes fell slightly. It was like a silent apology. Naomi just nodded slightly. No blame, no anger, no need to explain. After Paula passed, the t-shirted man on Naomi's right whispered, "Ma'am, I saw something happen just now. That captain doesn't seem to be in a good mood." Naomi wasn't surprised. Many people ahead had definitely noticed. "It's nothing," she replied. "It's not the first time this has happened to me." The uncle nodded, his eyes filled with sympathy. "Yeah, I see. People sometimes forget these days that everyone's ticket costs the same. Naomi smiled slightly, but it was a sad smile. Sometimes people forget that people are of equal value. That silenced the uncle. He moved a little to give her some space. It was a simple gesture, but it warmed Naomi's heart in the dull moment. The cabin lights were dimmed to allow passengers to rest. Naomi opened her bag and took out a folder printed on A4 paper, a draft of the speech she planned to give at the hearing tomorrow morning. The title reads, Oversight, Culture, and Responsibility in Modern Air Travel. Her voice silently recited each line, each sentence, in which there is a passage she especially devoted much effort to. From the first-class cabin to row 40, from the captain to the ground staff, every passenger deserves to be treated fairly, not because of their ethnicity, not because of how much they paid, not because of some misconception of their worth as a human being. Naomi looked at that part for a long time. A sigh escaped. Am I really living up to what I wrote, she asked herself, or did I just get pushed down to line 33 because I didn't want trouble? A heaviness in her chest made her pause. She was a woman who rarely doubted herself. But tonight, amid the smell of leftovers and the intermittent cries of babies in the cabin, she felt a voice questioning her. She closed her eyes. Memories flashed back to mornings nearly 30 years ago when she worked as a warehouse worker in Atlanta. She stood in the hot sun counting goods, pushing heavy pallets, her hands bleeding but still smiling. She remembered the times when newcomers called her the nice black lady who lifts boxes instead of her name. She had made it through. And now, sitting in row 33B, she was not sad about her seat, but sad because the old feeling had returned, the feeling of being undervalued. Naomi opened her eyes. The plane is still flying steadily. A thought flashed through her mind. Don't let this pass like a small scratch, because not everyone has the chance to fight back like I do. And if I don't stand up for people like me, who will? She slid her laptop out of her bag. The screen lit up. The Wi-Fi icon appeared. The words "First Class Complimentary Access" made her smile. It turns out her access code was still valid. Even though she had been switched, the system still considered her a first-class passenger. She typed a few words. An internal login window appeared, the portal reserved for her position as commissioner. The words "Federal Transportation Safety Network" ran across it. Her finger paused for half a second, a moment of hesitation. Part of her felt sorry for Paula. Part of her felt sorry for the entire airport security system, where most of the employees worked hard and dutifully. Part of her thought was of how big a storm she was about to stir up. But then Naomi Caldwell pressed enter. A window filled with data appeared. And flight SC217, the flight she was on, appeared right on the pale blue screen. Okay, she whispered. Here we go. Just then the plane lurched slightly to the left. Not too much, but enough to make the glass of water on the tray rattle. The man in the t-shirt next to him held his breath. The young girl hugged the baby closer. Naomi looked up at the cabin ceiling, then at the laptop screen. A strange sensation touched her spine, a premonition or a feeling she couldn't tell. The flight tonight seems to be very long. About 10 minutes after the slight jolt, the cabin returned to its familiar calm. Soft whispers. The steady breathing of a child in a nap. The sound of a man in the front row turning the pages of a newspaper. The steady hum of the engine like the sigh of the sky itself. But Naomi was not as peaceful as the plane cabin tried to appear. On her laptop screen a line of text appeared, "Flight Crew Activity Log. Updated 7 minutes ago." The man in the t-shirt next to her glanced at her, then looked away. Naomi kept her eyes glued to the screen. She tapped the trackpad, expanding the pilot status section. The first line made her pause. Captain Grant Huxley, mandatory rest hours 10, actual rest logged 24 hours 3.8 hours. Naomi stared at the 3 digits for a long time, longer than usual. She felt her heart beat slow. 3-8. She muttered very softly as if talking to herself. No pilot, no one is allowed to fly a commercial plane interstate with just over 3 hours of rest. To achieve this, the logger must have altered or corrupted the report. Another possibility, and more dangerous, is that Huxley deliberately concealed the schedule. Naomi closed her eyes for a second. Images from hundreds of investigations she had worked on flashed through her mind. Some accidents were caused by technology, some by mechanical failure. But many more than one might think were caused by people, by impulsive decisions, by unseen moments of exhaustion. The cockpit door. Captain Huxley's face as he stepped out to dismiss her, his voice dry, sharp, unreasonably angry. The way he was so sensitive about something that shouldn't have been so heated. An uncomfortable question crept through Naomi's mind. Is he really sober enough to fly this plane? She took a deep breath. She didn't want to jump to conclusions, but her intuition, as someone who had spent 20 years tracking safety data, was knocking at the door of her mind louder than all the noise around her. The plane suddenly tilted slightly to the right. Not enough to make the passengers scream, but enough to make Naomi raise her head. The young girl on her left put her hand on her child. "What's the matter?" Naomi looked out the window on the other side of the cabin. Outside was only thick darkness, impossible to tell from the darkness. "It might be the crosswind," she said softly. "It's okay." But in her chest a very small, prickling feeling began to form. The feeling of someone who has seen too many reports, should never happen. Just then the seatbelt sign came on. A ding sounded overhead. Then a flight attendant's voice rang out, more urgent than usual. "Ladies and gentlemen, please return to your seats and fasten your seatbelts. We are about to experience some light turbulence." The uncle next to Naomi shrugged. There must be another storm somewhere. Naomi didn't answer. She pushed the laptop screen down a bit, still holding it. She looked up the aisle. Paula was walking up to the front of the cabin, her expression more serious than usual. Unconsciously, she only glanced at Naomi for a moment, a look that said, "Something's wrong." Naomi leaned slightly as if to better feel the vibrations of the plane's fuselage. "It is uneven." It wasn't the usual turbulence, the kind that only causes the water tray to ripple slightly. It was the kind of vibration that a pilot is adjusting more than necessary. For a split second, Naomi heard the engine change pitch, like someone trying to accelerate and then let go. Once again, she turned back to the laptop screen. Autopilot information is now highlighted. Autopilot mode disengaged. Manual pilot in control. Captain Huxley, co-pilot Rodriguez. Assisting Naomi placed her hand on her chest. Why is autopilot off? Why is the captain flying in normal weather conditions? Why is there this vibration? A cold thought ran down my spine. Is he trying to prove something, or is he unable to maintain a steady flight path? She swallowed. Then a voice came from the first-class cabin, not loud but clearly audible, for the cabin was silent. A man's voice, elegant, slightly hoarse. Grant, let me see the cockpit. I want you to show me the system." "Just a minute." Naomi stiffened. That must be Logan Pierce, the man Captain Huxley wanted seat 1A for. A big name in commercial real estate, a well-connected person who regularly sponsors SkyContinental Airlines events. A person too used to being given priority, and was knocking on the cockpit door. "Oh my," Naomi thought to herself. The young girl next to her was startled. "What's the matter?" Naomi didn't want to worry her, so she just shook her head slightly. But her heart was not at peace for a second. She knew very well, no one, absolutely no one, was allowed in the cockpit while the plane was in manual mode, especially during the climb phase. It is a basic, obvious rule as important as the structure of the aircraft itself. The plane shook again, louder than before. A little girl in the back seat burst into tears. Some passengers began to look around, worried. The man in the t-shirt held the armrest of the chair. "Ma'am, it's probably just the wind, right?" Naomi kept her voice steady. "I hope so." But her heart beats differently. Another ding sound was heard. This time not the seatbelt light. Is the crew's internal signal, a thin but decisive sound, something Naomi had heard on hundreds of surveillance missions before. For a few brief seconds the cabin fell silent. Then from up ahead came the sound of hurried footsteps. Paula ran across the aisle, not running but walking very quickly to the doors separating first class. Naomi saw her feet stop before the curtain. The moment lasted longer than usual. It was as if Paula was listening to something behind closed doors. Then Paula pushed the door open and disappeared into the first-class cabin. Naomi gently placed the laptop on her lap. No doubt about it. Something unusual happened inside the cockpit. She looked at the young girl, then at the man in the t-shirt. A question popped into her head, a question she didn't want to think about but couldn't ignore. If the person piloting this plane is really not in his right mind, do I have a responsibility to act? The position of Federal Safety Commissioner is not a decorative title. It is a responsibility sometimes overwhelming, but it requires the holder to face the truth, even when the truth is extremely unpleasant. She remembered what an old teacher said years ago. In this industry, when you see a problem, you are no longer an outsider. Naomi touched the trackpad, opening the Warnings and Active Flags section. A warning appears, crew deviation detected. Minor. Naomi put her hand to her lips, covering her gasp. Deviation. At this stage, a thought flashed. If he lets the other person into the cockpit, just a slight touch on the control panel, just a touch, is enough to change the flight axis. Another tremor. Stronger. Many people in the cabin cried out, "What was that?" Naomi sat up straight. Her eyes widened. These are no longer weather-like vibrations. This is the shake of a person trying to pull the plane back on track after it veered off course. Naomi's heart pounded, and as she looked up the road ahead, she knew, flight tonight will not be as simple as it should be. About 5 minutes after the jolt, the cabin's soft yellow lights changed to a brighter, whiter hue. A subtle change that only those paying attention would notice. But Naomi saw it immediately. The light was a reminder that someone up ahead was trying to regain control. The young girl on Naomi's left whispered, "I don't know what's going on. The plane is shaking so strangely." Naomi put her hand on the girl's hand, her voice reassuring, "Buckle up and hold your child close. It's okay." But as she said that, her heart rang with a completely different tone. It's okay is only true if the person piloting this plane really knows what he's doing. A small signal came from the first-class cabin, the sound of a door creaking. Naomi looked up, tilting her head forward a little. The light coming from the crack in the door allowed her to see a figure moving inside. Then Logan Pierce's voice rang out again, this time more annoyed. "Grant, I told you to open the door for me. I'm not kidding. I want to see that control panel." His voice made many passengers turn to look. The man in the t-shirt next to Naomi said softly, "First class but so noisy." Naomi didn't respond. She focused entirely on the sounds ahead. A man like Logan Pierce, a man accustomed to pampering, accustomed to privilege, had no idea that a few misplaced steps in the cockpit could send a plane off course by hundreds of feet in a second. The stewardess's footsteps echoed hurriedly. It was Paula's voice, small but tense. "Mr. Pierce, please sit down. Cockpit is busy processing. Let us work." Logan shot back. "I paid $8,000 for this flight. I want to see what I paid for." "Your pilot said I could see." Naomi frowned. "Pilot said he could see." Did Huxley really say that? Before the question could be formulated, the plane suddenly tilted to the left at a much larger angle than before. The entire cabin let out a collective "oh" of fear. Several people quickly clung to the front seats. The little boy in the young girl's arms burst into tears, his sobs mingling with the wind outside. Naomi stiffened. She sensed it more than anyone. This was no mere disturbance. This is a deliberate tilt. But not the correct tilt. It was awkward, stumbling, as if the driver was fumbling with the maneuver. The man in the t-shirt grabbed the armrest of the chair. "Oh my God, this is not normal." Naomi didn't answer. She stared blankly ahead where the partition leading to first class and the cockpit was closed. A cold feeling spread through her, not fear but clarity. "We have to do something. Now." Paula reappeared in the economy class. Her expression was no longer as normal as before. Naomi noticed that Paula's hands were shaking slightly as she held onto the edge of the seat for balance. Naomi called softly, "Paula." Paula turned startled to find Naomi looking directly into her eyes. For a second, the two women, one a flight attendant, the other a federal safety commissioner, shared a silent worry. Naomi said softly enough for only the two of them to hear, "Is there something up there?" Paula pursed her lips. Her eyes glanced around as if afraid someone would hear. Then she bent down and lowered her voice. I'm not sure anymore, ma'am. Captain seems different from usual." "What is different?" Paula swallowed. "He was unusually irritable. And Mr. Pierce kept knocking on the cockpit door. They were saying something to each other that I couldn't hear, but I could tell First Officer Rodriguez seemed very nervous." Naomi gently placed her hand on Paula's hand, her voice slow. "Did you hear autopilot turn off?" Paula was stunned, her face pale. "Ma'am, how do you know?" "Just answer." Paula nodded very slightly. "It's off. I see the signal light. The first officer is trying to stabilize it, but the captain doesn't seem to let him." Naomi closed her eyes for a moment. Huxley was at the helm. And he was not well, and Mr. Pierce, who had money but no sense, kept pushing on the cockpit door. Naomi opened her eyes. Every word she spoke was small but sharp. "Paula, if he lets Pierce into the cockpit, I need to know immediately." Paula looked at Naomi as if to ask who she really was, but she just nodded slightly. "Yes, ma'am." Then Paula went on to first class. Naomi opened her laptop. She went to flight behavior reports. A small graph appeared. The flight path had been drifting slightly northeast a few seconds before the bank. The man in the t-shirt asked, "Ma'am, what's wrong? You had me worried." Naomi gently placed her hand on his shoulder. "Keep your seatbelt fastened, and if anything happens, I'll let you know." That statement made the uncle silent, but his eyes were full of trust. The young girl hugged her child and muttered, "God, please don't let anything happen. I just want to go home." Naomi looked at her mother's face, red eyes, shaking hands, ragged breathing, and a wave of emotion washed over her. "This is why I do this job. Not for the title, not for the position, but for people like this girl. People who have no way to protect themselves if something bad happens." Naomi gripped the edge of her laptop. Her nerves were as tight as a string. Already, a loud clang came from the front. The whole cabin was silent. Naomi recognized the sound immediately, the sound of the cockpit door being unlocked. Paula shouted softly but clearly, "Mr. Pierce, don't go in there, stop." Then another harsher male voice spoke up, "Paula, let him in." Naomi stiffened. It was Captain Huxley's voice. A chill ran down her spine. He actually let Pierce into the cockpit. A passenger jumped up. "What's going on? Why is the cockpit open?" The t-shirt uncle whispered, "Oh my God." The young girl hugged her child tighter, tears flowing. Naomi had nothing more to hesitate about. She folded her laptop, "Stand up, and say very quietly to yourself, 'Okay, that's enough.'" Paula ran back to the economy cabin, eyes wide open. "Ma'am, Mr. Pierce is in." The captain said to leave them alone. "I can't stop him." Naomi looked at Paula firmly. "It's time, Paula. Keep calm." Then she stepped out into the aisle, her eyes fixed on the first-class doors. The t-shirt uncle called out, "Ma'am, where are you going?" Naomi turned back, her eyes so determined that the uncle was speechless. "To keep people safe." The young girl hugged her child, looking at Naomi with eyes filled with hope and despair. Naomi nodded to her slightly, like a promise. No one said anything more. Naomi's shoes clicked softly but determinedly on the cabin carpet. Just a few more steps and she would reach the dividing curtain. Just a few more steps and she would be facing the cockpit door where two irresponsible men were standing between the life and death of hundreds of people. When Naomi's hand touched the edge of the curtain, the plane tilted sharply again, this time in a way that made the entire cabin scream. And in that chaotic noise, Naomi clearly heard Captain Huxley shout, "Pierce, don't touch that!" Naomi pulled the curtain open and stepped into first class. Tonight's story, just getting started. The atmosphere in first class was very different from economy. Warm lighting, the smell of strong alcohol, expensive perfume, all of it created a false sense of security. But even those accustomed to privilege were looking at each other uneasily. Naomi stepped in. The noise from the forward cockpit was both chaotic and tormenting. "Pierce," I said, "don't touch that." Captain Huxley's voice was filled with panic. Then there was the sound of metal clanking chairs turning and jostling footsteps. Paula ran close behind Naomi, breathing heavily. "Ma'am, they're fighting in the cockpit." A female passenger in seat 2C covered her mouth. "Oh my God, are the pilots arguing?" Naomi did not turn around. She only said, her voice low but firm, "Everyone sit down and fasten your seatbelts." Some obeyed immediately. Others were confused. But when the plane shook violently, making the whole row of seats vibrate, everyone rushed into their seats as if pulled by instinct. Naomi moved toward the cockpit door. It was closed, but obviously unlocked. She put her hand on the cold metal handle. Paula whispered, "Ma'am, you can't." Naomi looked Paula straight in the face. "How much longer do you want, mister?" Pierce to stay in there. Paula was silent, her teeth clenched. She took a half step back as if handing the responsibility over to Naomi. Naomi pushed the door. The moment the door opened, a blue light from the control panel swept across her face. The cold neon light of airplane technology. The faint smell of ozone, the hum of an electric fan inside, the occasional small warning beep, beep. The sight before her eyes made her heart sink. Captain Huxley stood off to the right, his left hand clutching the co-pilot's seat for balance. His face was red, his hair was disheveled, his pupils dilated. Logan Pierce stood next to the center console, one hand gripping the nearby armrest, the other too close to the aerodynamic controls. If he touched any of the levers, the stability control system could be thrown off. First Officer Daniel Rodriguez sat in the passenger seat, sweat beading his forehead. His hand gripped the yoke, trying to pull the plane back onto the correct path. Naomi felt her chest tighten at the sight. This is what people fear most in aviation: a chaotic cockpit, an exhausted pilot, an uninformed passenger, and more than 200 lives hanging in the balance. Naomi stepped one foot into the cockpit. "Stop it," she said loudly, her voice stronger than she intended. All three turned back. Huxley rolled his eyes. What are you doing here? Get out, this is a secure area." Naomi kept her eyes unblinking. "And what are you doing, Captain, letting a civilian stand less than a foot from the control panel?" Pierce spoke up, his voice annoyed, but still maintaining the confident air of someone who had taken priority. "I just want to see." Grant said I could look, Rodriguez yelled, the first time Naomi had seen him lose his temper. "Don't touch anything. God, you're distracting, Captain." The plane shook violently again. The nose of the plane lowered a little and then rose again. Naomi felt the sinking feeling of a misaligned adjustment. "Grant," she said, looking Huxley straight in the eye, her voice pulling him back down to earth. "You're not okay. You're tired. And you know it." Huxley gasped. His yoke hand shook. I'm still in control. I've been flying for 25 years. Don't interfere." Rodriguez hiccuped and laughed bitterly. "Ma'am, he's trying to fly in this condition." "I tried to turn on autopilot, but Captain wouldn't let me." Naomi tilted her head, looking deep into Huxley's eyes. Red, dark circles under eyes, raucous. And most importantly, he wasn't focused. His eyes kept darting between Naomi Pierce and the warning lights. No sane pilot would look away while flying hand over hand through turbulence. Naomi said slowly, "Captain Huxley, I demand an honest answer. Did you have the required rest hours on this flight?" Huxley snapped. I said, "It's okay." Naomi did not take her eyes off. "You had over 3.5 hours off in the last 24 hours. "Right." Huxley paused. Rodriguez turned to Naomi, stunned. "Ma'am, how did you—" No, Naomi did not reply. Huxley looked at her as if she had just read his diary without permission. You're following me." "No," Naomi said, her voice low and eerily calm. "I'm watching the safety of the 216 people sitting behind me." A silence fell heavily on the cockpit. Then Naomi spoke, each word clear and distinct. toi la, Naomi Caldwell, Federal Transportation Safety Commissioner. Huxley's expression changed in just a split second, but Naomi saw it clearly. His instincts told him this was trouble, but his ego wouldn't accept it. You're just a passenger who got switched seats, he burst out. You have no right? Yes, Naomi interrupted, her voice low but heavy as steel. According to FAA Emergency Regulation 44B, when a pilot appears to be incapacitated or makes an unsafe decision, a federal commissioner has the authority to request a temporary transfer of control to the first officer. Rodriguez opened his eyes wide. Ma'am, what you're saying is, you have the right. I don't just have rights, Naomi said. I have responsibilities. Huxley took a step back, his hand slipping from the yoke. No one can do that to me. I'm Captain Rodriguez Weak Grant. Let go, you're pulling off course. Naomi didn't need any more proof. She stepped into the cockpit. Huxley shouted, Get out, you have no right. Naomi stood in the middle of the entrance, the control panel light shining on her cheeks. She looked straight at Rodriguez. First Officer Rodriguez. Can you fly? Rodriguez tightened his yoke, his voice choked. Ma'am, I've been flying for the past 10 minutes. Naomi nodded. Then she turned to Captain Huxley, speaking each word clearly, not loudly, not forcefully, but with authority in every breath. Captain Grant Huxley, I hereby declare you relieved of duty immediately. In that moment, all noise seemed to disappear. There was only the faint warning and Huxley's rapid breathing. Rodriguez was almost shocked. Ma'am, are you really? Naomi nodded slightly. You have command, first officer. Reclaim autopilot if possible. Huxley stepped forward, his face red, and shouted, No one can take away my authority. I am Captain I. You left a passenger standing at the controls, Naomi said. You were flying while severely sleep-deprived. You let your emotions influence your decisions. And you almost dropped the plane 800 feet in less than 15 seconds. Rodriguez startled. Ma'am, you can see the height difference, Naomi replied. I looked at the flight deviation data. Huxley backed into the wall, eyes wide, chest heaving. No, I don't. But he could not hold on any longer. Words are broken. And in that moment, Naomi Caldwell saw a painful truth. This man, despite having flown thousands of hours, had long since lost to himself. Naomi said softly, Captain, please sit in the jump seat in the back. I don't want to handcuff you in front of everyone. Huxley looked at Naomi, his eyes defeated, brittle as broken glass. Rodriguez spoke up, his voice full of respect and determination. Ma'am, I have control. Naomi nodded. I have control. The plane leveled out. The sound steadied. The passengers in the back were still panicking, but the plane had calmed down. Naomi took a step back, then looked straight at Huxley. I'll sit here, and I'll monitor the rest of the flight. Huxley looked down, shivering, then sat down on the jump seat. Pierce backed out of the cockpit, his face pale. Grant, I don't know. Naomi looked at him with a look that left him speechless. You will leave this area, now. Pierce nodded quickly, backing out of the cockpit, as if the floor were hot. Before closing the door, Naomi spoke softly, not just to the three men in the cockpit, but to the entire unfolding story. Responsibility is not what one wears. Responsibility is what one does. Then she closed the door. Outside, the first-class cabin was silent. More than 200 lives are still there. And now they're safer, because Naomi Caldwell has just stepped into her rightful place, the place she was born to hold. The cockpit door closed behind Naomi, creating a different kind of silence, like the closing of a courtroom. The lights in first class dimmed, and the sound of passengers' labored breathing mixed with the steady hum of the engines. Paula stood there, her hands clutching the metal tray, as if it were the only thing keeping her grounded in reality. Ma'am, are you okay? Paula asked, her voice quieter than the air conditioner overhead. Naomi didn't answer right away. She tilted her head slightly, listening as if she could sense the plane's condition with her ears. Then she said, The plane is more stable. Daniel is flying well. Paula nodded but was still panicked. And Captain Huxley, he... In the jump seat, Naomi replied, her voice low and slow. And he'll be there until we hit the ground. Paula swallowed as if she wanted to ask more but was afraid of what she might hear. Naomi looked at her and said softly, "You did well, Paula. If you hadn't kept calm earlier, the situation would have been much worse." Paula trembled, not from fear but from the relief of her anxiety. The emotions she'd been holding back since the beginning of the flight suddenly overflowed. "Ma'am, Paula shook her head slightly. "I just don't want anyone to get hurt. I'm afraid people will think I'm on his side." Naomi put a hand on her shoulder. "You're on the side of safety. That's the only side to be on." Paula laughed softly, a real tearful laugh. Naomi looked around the first-class cabin. Everyone was looking at her with a mixture of gratitude and surprise. She could feel something invisible spreading through the cabin, a relief that no one dared to speak of, only to exhale. But Naomi knew it wasn't over. Because the calm in the cabin is just the surface of a much larger storm, a legal storm, a political storm, a human storm. Row 1F suddenly let out a loud voice. "What's going on?" No one saying anything. The man was Robert Langford, a businessman who traveled frequently. He was impatient, his face red. "Are we in danger, or is she?" He pointed at Naomi, exaggerating things. Those words startled a few people. A woman in 2A pulled her scarf back. An elderly man frowned uncomfortably. Naomi did not react immediately. She looked straight at Robert, her gaze so calm that it made him pause slightly. "Mr. Langford," Naomi said, "I will explain, but I need you to keep your voice down. The noise won't help." "No help," Robert snapped. "We have a right to know what's going on." "Who are you to barge into the cockpit like that?" Paula whispered. "He's just panicking, ma'am." Naomi nodded and stepped forward. She stood beside Robert's chair, keeping a polite distance. "I'm Naomi Caldwell," she said, "Federal Transportation Safety Commissioner." Robert blinked repeatedly, as if his brain was trying to catch up with the information. Paula added, "And she just saved us from a very dangerous situation." Robert was still upset. "But Captain Huxley is experienced. I've flown this flight many times." "I don't believe he would." Naomi didn't let him finish his sentence. "He let an unauthorized passenger into the cockpit. He was flying severely sleep-deprived, and in 15 seconds he almost lost 800 feet of altitude." The whole cabin was silent. Naomi continued, her voice calm but cold like a sharpened knife. "I don't want to scare anyone, but I want everyone to understand this went beyond a simple mistake. This was an abuse of power and a violation of safety." Robert looked down at his hands. They were shaking slightly. Naomi placed a hand lightly on the arm of his chair, the way a mother would place a hand on the shoulder of a frightened child. "The good news is we're safe. First Officer Rodriguez has control of the plane, and I'll be here until we land." Robert sighed, his whole body slumped. I'm sorry. I'm scared." Naomi nodded. "Fear is normal. What matters is how we face it." Robert was silent for a long time. Then finally he said, "Thank you." Naomi returned to her seat. Her heart was pounding harder than she cared to admit. Only when she sat down did her breathing slow. Pressure isn't always screams. Sometimes it's looks. The weight of 216 lives on your shoulders. Paula returned with a glass of water. "Ma'am, thank you." Naomi took a small sip. The cold water traveled down her throat, clearing her mind. But before I could put down my glass, the intercom rang. Daniel's voice rang out, "Cabin crew, please prepare for an important announcement." Paula held her breath. Naomi looked up. It wasn't her usual announcement tone. It didn't sound calm or professional. Daniel's voice was tense, but controlled. Then the speaker broadcast his voice. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is First Officer Daniel Rodriguez. I would like to advise that we have been requested by ATC to make a slight course change to avoid an area of sudden heavy turbulence ahead." A passenger asked, Is it dangerous? Daniel continued. I will do my best to stabilize the plane, but please fasten your seatbelts and limit your movements. This is not a routine warning. Paula turned to Naomi, her face pale. Ma'am, is that area in the report? I checked the flight before, it seems. No, Naomi said immediately. Unusual turbulence. Like clear air turbulence, Paula asked. Naomi nodded. Clear air turbulence. Turbulence not visible by radar. A new challenge. Naomi put down her glass, leaned back in her chair and clasped her hands together. Then she said softly, almost whispering to herself, "Go ahead, I can still stand." The cabin shook again, this time much harder than before. A cup on someone's table fell over and rolled with the slight tilt of the plane. A small scream rang out. Paula ran down the aisle, reminding everyone to buckle up. Naomi closed her eyes for a few seconds. Her heart was pounding, but her mind was clear as glass. This is when the plane needs stability, and this is when the man inside needs hope. She opened her eyes, unbuckled her seatbelt, and stood up. Robert looked at her, stunned. "Where are you going?" Naomi looked around the cabin, every fearful face, every hand clutching the armrest, every eye searching for support. "I go to reassure people who need it," she said. And she walked down the aisle, overcoming the sway, keeping her balance with an almost masterful restraint. An old woman grabbed her hand. "Miss, are we okay?" Naomi gently took her hand. "It's okay. We have a good pilot at the controls. And I won't let anything happen to you." A younger man said, "But why is it shaking so strongly?" "Because we're avoiding an area of unseen turbulence," Naomi replied, her voice low. "It happens sometimes. The important thing is that the crew is on course." The man nodded, taking a deep breath. Paula looked at Naomi, her eyes filled with gratitude and admiration. "Ma'am, you really are." Naomi smiled slightly. "I'm just doing what needs to be done." Suddenly a warning sound came from the cockpit from ahead, a longer and sharper beep than before. Naomi turned around. Paula took a deep breath. "Oh my God, what warning is that?" Naomi did not reply. She just looked toward the cockpit door. There was a flash of genuine concern in her eyes for the first time all flight. Not because of shaking, not for the passengers, because she knew what it meant. A dire warning had been triggered. The storm is not over yet. It's just really beginning. The cockpit warning sounded a second time longer, higher, like a small knife cutting through the already anxious air of the cabin. Naomi stopped dead in her tracks. No one said anything, but everyone heard. All eyes turned to the cockpit door. Paula covered her mouth with her hand. A young woman holding a baby began to tremble. An old man whispered, What warning is that?" Naomi took a deep breath, keeping her voice as calm as possible. "I need to go check." Paula called after her. "Ma'am, let me know," Naomi said softly, but the finality in her voice made Paula stop short. "I need to know exactly what's going on." As Naomi walked toward the cockpit door, the plane shook again. A jolt, as if someone had pushed hard on the belly of the plane from the outside. A few small screams were heard. Naomi kept walking, her low shoes providing a steady balance. She put her hand on the doorknob just as the door opened slightly from the inside. Daniel Rodriguez appeared, his face as tense as a bowstring. "Ma'am," he said quickly, "I need you inside." Paula gasped. "First officer, what is it?" Daniel didn't answer. He just leaned to the side, getting out of Naomi's way. Naomi walked in. The cockpit was as bright blue as before, but the atmosphere was completely different. Captain Grant Huxley was still sitting in his jump seat. But now his hair was damp with sweat, and his hands were clenched into the corners of the seat to keep himself calm. He no longer screamed, no longer struggled. Just silence, the silence of a man who knew all power had been taken from him. As for Daniel, he was fighting with the control panel. "Autopilot just disconnected," he said quickly to Naomi. "Vertical control system error." Naomi paused. "Pitch axis." Daniel nodded vigorously. "Yes, and It doesn't seem to be a total failure, but it does make the plane more sensitive than usual. It's very difficult to keep level. Naomi looked at the warning board, yellow light flashing, small text appeared, pitch trim fault, manual input required. It's not a serious problem, but if left alone things can escalate very quickly. Naomi asked. The vibration frequency increased, right? Yes, Daniel replied, and the clear air turbulence ahead is longer than expected. Another beep sounded sharper, as if urging. Naomi put her hands on the back of the chair, keeping her voice steady. Daniel, can you control it? Daniel glanced at the yoke. His hand clenched it so tight his knuckles turned white. I'm trying. But if the turbulence gets stronger, I'll have to control it almost constantly. Naomi understood immediately. This is not just a technical problem. This is a test of human endurance. Daniel was only 34. Good. Quick. But one small mistake, and this 500,000 pounds 787 would teach them about gravity. Naomi calmly asked, "Do you want me to help monitor?" Daniel looked at Naomi as if she had just handed him a lifeline. "Yes, ma'am. I need someone to check the alert and cross-check the altitude." Naomi pulled down the cockpit folding seat. There was a slight metallic sound, and the seat sprang open. She sat down and fastened her belt. Every gesture was neat and precise. There was no haste, no tremor. There is only the stillness of one who has gone too far in life to fear a storm. Outside, the plane rocked slightly. Naomi looked at the altimeter, 32000 feet. Okay. Rodriguez adjusted the pitch with his hands, his arms moving slightly but constantly. The trajectory was slightly off, but he pulled it back. Naomi reads the signals. Pitch okay. Airspeed steady at 287 knots. Cabin pressure normal. Daniel nodded. Thank you, ma'am. Behind them, Captain Grant Huxley spoke suddenly for the first time in many minutes of silence. I can help cross-check." Daniel turned around, surprised. Naomi turned to look at Huxley. His eyes were still red and tired, but there was something else in them. Not arrogance, not defiance, but genuine remorse and a need to salvage the last shred of responsibility for a failing career. Naomi looked at him for a long time, a very long time. Then she said, "Captain, can you help me monitor the cabin parameters?" Huxley looked as if he couldn't believe his ears. You give me," Naomi said softly. "No one is punished when they are trying to save others." Huxley nodded vigorously. Very vigorously, as if given a last shred of dignity. He sat up straight, wiped the sweat, and checked the cabin gauges like a real pilot again. Daniel said nothing, but Naomi saw the relief in his eyes. In that moment, even if it was just a few minutes, even if it was just a fraction of it, they were a team. Suddenly, the plane nosedived. Daniel yoke. Turbulence is in. The plane shook as if someone had grabbed it by the tail. Control panels rattled, lights flickered. Naomi said quickly. Elevation dropped 200 feet. Daniel pulled gently but firmly. Hold, hold, hold. The plane shook again. A strong twist from the right wing caused the yoke to shake. Huxley exclaimed. Wind shear gently. Naomi adjusted her perspective. Sudden change in wind speed to the right. Daniel turn left, 2 degrees. Daniel turns the yoke to the left. Copy. The plane tilted slightly, then gradually stabilized. Naomi checks altitude 31900, 31950, taking it back. Daniel let out a long breath. The worst vibrations of the flight had passed, but none of the 3 people on board dared to let their guard down. Naomi said, "Is there any turbulence ahead?" Daniel replied, "Yes, but much milder. We're through the worst of it." Naomi nodded. Then she said softly, as if speaking to both men in the cockpit, "You did well." Rodriguez smiled tiredly. "Ma'am, if you weren't here, I think I would have lost my temper." Huxley said softly, Me too." Naomi leaned back in the jump seat. Everyone has their weak points. The important thing is knowing where to stand when they do. 5 minutes later, turbulence decreased significantly. The warning sound is off. The cockpit space seemed to breathe again after a bout of coughing up blood. Rodriguez looked at Naomi. "Ma'am, we should inform the passengers." Naomi nodded, stood up, and opened the door. The first-class cabin was strangely silent. Everyone was waiting. Paula ran back immediately, her voice choked. "Ma'am, are we okay?" Naomi nodded, her voice reassuring. "It's okay. We're past the worst of the danger zone." A sigh of relief echoed throughout the cabin like a gentle wave spreading quickly down to business and economy. An old lady raised her hand. Are you sure?" Naomi held the old lady's hand, her eyes warm. "I'm sure." And for the first time since the beginning of the flight, Naomi's small smile appeared. Not big, not forced, just a small curve enough to make the whole cabin believe that the real danger had passed. But before Naomi left the cockpit completely, Daniel called out softly, "Ma'am." Naomi turned back. Daniel looked at her for a long time, then said in a voice as light as the wind, "Just now, when the system reported a pitch error, I was really scared. But when you sat down on the jump seat, I wasn't scared anymore." Naomi slowly nodded. "Because you are not alone." Daniel smiled softly. "Yes, not alone." Naomi responded with a line she only used in the most important moments of her life. "People become strongest when they remember they do not have to fight alone." Daniel bowed his head as a thank you that spoke louder than words. Naomi walked out and closed the door. Behind the newly restored calm in the cabin, Naomi knew that this flight still had one final challenge. Not turbulence, not a technical error, but to face the truth that as soon as they land, another storm will be waiting below the runway. A storm of law, of media, of responsibility. But now, with the cabin slowly stabilizing, Naomi allowed herself to breathe slowly, one long breath, one small moment. Then she said softly, as if reminding herself, "Every storm shall pass," and she turned back to her chair, ready for what lay ahead. The plane returned to calm, but Naomi knew that calm was as fragile as frost on glass. At 30,000 feet, calm was always the most fragile thing. Naomi finally sat down in her seat and buckled her seatbelt. Her body was still warm with adrenaline. She could feel her heart rate still racing, not from fear, but from her body's natural state of alertness after being through so much in so short a time. Paula came over and gently placed a bottle of water on Naomi's table. "Ma'am, are you sure? You look a bit tired." Naomi smiled. "I'm fine, thank you, Paula." Paula looked at her for a few more seconds before returning to the first-class cabin to check on the passengers. Naomi leaned her head back in the chair and closed her eyes for a few seconds. Just a few seconds, long enough to hear herself take a deep breath. This place is indeed calm, but the storm has not passed. Intercom pops up. Daniel's voice rang out. "Ladies and gentlemen, we have cleared the turbulence zone. The aircraft is now back on a stable flight path toward Washington, D.C. Estimated time of arrival is approximately 40 minutes. The whole cabin seemed to let out a collective sigh. Naomi opened her eyes. 40 minutes. That means in just 40 minutes, all of what just happened will need to be confronted publicly by the FAA, by airport security, by the airline, by the media. She will face dozens of questions, accusations, endless lines of inquiry. But even that did not tire her as much as thinking of Captain Grant Huxley's eyes as she entered the cockpit. That look, at the end, was like the look of someone who understood too late that what they lost was not power but dignity. Naomi pressed 2 fingers to the bridge of her nose and took a deep breath. Part of her, a very human part, felt sorry. Another part, the part of her years fighting to survive in a biased industry, speaks bluntly. He did it himself. He suffered. Between those two voices, Naomi was silent. She has always been able to see things from multiple perspectives, even when it is most uncomfortable. Less than 3 minutes later, Naomi heard hurried footsteps behind her. Paula ran up again, breathing heavily. "Ma'am, something's wrong." Naomi jumped up immediately. What Paula swallowed. A passenger in economy class reported someone had difficulty breathing. Very serious. Naomi stood up without thinking. Take me there. Paula nodded vigorously, saying as she walked. The condition started after a period of strong turbulence. He said he felt chest pain. His girlfriend was panicking. Naomi quickly moved through the cabins. The plane shook slightly, but no longer dangerously. Still, Naomi knew the symptoms were not simple. Since 2020, long flights have always been a risk for DVT blood clots, especially when passengers are sedentary. Strong turbulence can also stress someone enough to trigger heart syndrome. Paula led Naomi to row 37. A white man in his 40s, brown hair, sweat pouring down his forehead, clutching his chest. His breathing was ragged, his eyes wide open. His girlfriend, a young blonde woman, almost burst into tears. Please, someone help him, he can't breathe. Naomi crouched down beside him. Can you hear me? The man tried to nod but was so tired he could barely lift his head. Naomi looked at Paula. Get the medical kit, quickly. Paula ran away immediately. Naomi turned back to look at the man, her voice slow. What is your name, T? Thomas Price. Thomas, where do you feel pain? On the left side of your chest or in the middle, between, spreading to the back? Naomi tilted her head. Do you have a tingling sensation in your left arm? Yes. It's numb. Naomi squeezed his hand gently. Thomas, I need you to breathe slowly. Slow down. The woman next to him cried. He has a mild heart condition, but never like this. Naomi put her hand on her shoulder. I'll help. Take a deep breath. I need you to calm down. Paula brought the medical kit. Naomi opened it, her hand steady, not shaking once. I need to check his blood pressure. Paula helps put the measuring tape on. Thomas groaned softly. Naomi said to Paula, make sure the surrounding walkways are clear. We may need to move. Paula nodded vigorously and said loudly to the nearby passengers, please make space. Naomi looks at the index. Blood pressure lower than normal. Heart rate faster, too fast. This guy can't go into cardiac arrest on a plane. Not now. Naomi looked up. Paula, I need to talk to the cockpit. Paula ran away. Naomi turned back to Thomas. Thomas, listen. We're in the air. I'm going to request a priority landing. His girlfriend burst into tears. Please save him. Naomi put her hand on her cheek. I'm doing everything. Trust me. Paula opened the cockpit door. Naomi followed. Daniel turned back. Ma'am, Naomi left him guessing. We have a passenger with a suspected heart attack. He's getting worse. We need priority landing. Daniel squeezed the yoke lightly. Ma'am, I can request ATC for a short approach, but... He looked at the control panel where the pitch error was still recorded. We still have to fly until we touch the wheel. Naomi replied, I know. Daniel looked at Naomi for a few more seconds. Okay, I'll request priority right away. He changed the frequency. Washington Center, this is SkyContinental 217. We have a passenger with a suspected heart attack. Request emergency priority landing. The frequency is silent for a few seconds, seconds that seem like hours. Then ATC replied, SC 217 priority granted. Guidance vector 270. Continue down to 18000 feet. Daniel 270. Down 18000. SC 217. Naomi turned back to Paula. Have the AED ready and tell the cabin to fasten seat belts. Paula nodded vigorously and ran outside. Naomi stopped and looked at Daniel, her voice low. Can you do it? Daniel squeezed the yoke lightly. Ma'am, I have to. Naomi placed her hand on the arm of his chair lightly, almost a blessing. I believe you. Huxley looked at Naomi, then at Daniel. His voice was hoarse but clear. Rodriguez, keep the pitch smooth. Don't let the nose drop when you touch the wheel. You can do it. Daniel nodded, surprised by the unexpected support. Naomi looked at Huxley for a few seconds, then nodded slightly at him. In the end, despite his mistakes, he was still a pilot, and in this moment, he was choosing to do the right thing. Naomi closed the door. When they returned to the economy cabin, Thomas was lying back, breathing heavily. His girlfriend wiped his sweat away, her hands shaking. "Ma'am, please don't let him." Naomi held her hand, her eyes calm. "We're landing with priority. There's a medical team on standby at the airport." Thomas tried to say, I'm scared." Naomi squeezed his hand gently. "Look at me." Thomas opened his eyes. His eyes were filled with the despair of a man facing something he cannot control. Naomi spoke slowly, each word warm like a hand placed on someone else's heart. "You are not going to die on this flight. I am right here." Thomas closed his eyes, 2 tears falling, not from pain but from hearing what he needed to hear most. Thomas's girlfriend took Naomi's hand. I thank you." Naomi put her hand on her shoulder. "When you love someone, you are never really alone." Intercom pops up. "Ladies and gentlemen, we are descending in preparation for an emergency landing. Please keep your seatbelts fastened at all times." Naomi stood next to row 37 even as the plane began to tilt and shake. She did not leave, not because of her job responsibilities, but because she knew sometimes just the presence of a calm person is enough to save a desperate person. The plane shook violently as it descended to a lower altitude. Paula stood at the front of the compartment, one hand on the seat, the other holding the AED in case of immediate need. Thomas opened his eyes and looked at Naomi again. Are you from the government?" Naomi nodded slightly. "Yes, but I am here now as a companion on this flight. Not in position." Thomas breathed heavier. Do you think I can get through?" Naomi looked into his eyes, then said the only thing she believed at the moment, "I still have someone waiting for me." And the heart of a lover does not surrender so easily. His girlfriend burst into tears, but no longer in panic, just pent-up emotions coming out. Naomi placed both hands on Thomas's hands. "Breathe in slowly. Breathe out slowly. I'll count." Paula looked at Naomi with absolute respect, not because of her position but because of what she did, igniting calm in others. Suddenly the loudspeaker rang out. "Cabin crew, prepare for landing. 10 minutes. Naomi said quickly. "Paula, keep the AED ready. When we hit the ground, Thomas could go into further shock from the deceleration." Paula nodded vigorously. Thomas's girlfriend holds Naomi's hand. "You will be here, right?" Naomi replied. "I'll stay here until he's taken off the plane." The girl burst into tears, hugging Naomi's arm. The plane tilted a little more. Naomi felt it clearly. They were entering the final approach. Thomas opened his eyes again, trying to speak. "If I can't make it." Naomi put her hand to his lips. "Shh, don't. We're not at the end of the runway yet." That's saying not just for Thomas, but also herself. The plane shook violently when the wind blew across. Paula shouted crosswind. Naomi took Thomas's hand. "Breathe in, breathe out. Follow me." Daniel's voice came over the intercom, clearly tense for the first time. "Touchdown. In 20 seconds. 20 seconds. 20 seconds seems like a lifetime." Naomi whispered. "Thomas, look at me. Don't be afraid." He looked, this time not out of desperation, but because of trust. The plane hit the ground. A loud thud, then the long screech of tires scraping against the pavement. Thomas squeezed Naomi's hand painfully. Naomi didn't move. She let him hold on. Let him be afraid. Let him live. The plane slowed down sharply, shook, and the lights outside the window blurred. And finally, the plane stopped. Paula exclaimed, "Thank God!" Thomas's girlfriend burst into tears of relief. Naomi still held Thomas's hand, her voice deep and warm. "See, we're still here." Thomas sighed, a long, shaky but living breath. No one knew that in a few minutes, when the doors opened, Naomi Caldwell would have to face the people waiting below. FAA, federal inspection teams, airport police, press, SkyContinental. But right now, only one thing matters. Thomas Price is still breathing. And everyone on that flight was brought down not only by Daniel's skills, but also by the presence of a woman named Naomi Caldwell. The plane door opened with a slow, heavy sound, like the sigh of a machine that had just been through a battle. The white light of the runway emergency lights flooded into the cabin. It was no longer the warm yellow light of first class or the cold blue light of the cockpit. This was real light, solemn, exposed, undisguised. Paula stood in front of the door to prevent passengers from spilling out. Outside, Naomi saw 2 ambulances, 3 airport police cars, a black SUV with the FAA logo, and further away, several people with professional cameras were being held back behind a security line. For a moment, Naomi felt her heart skip a beat, not from fear, but from the knowledge that this moment, the moment she stepped off the plane, would end the last remaining piece of this trip. Paula squeezed Naomi's hand gently. "Ma'am, they are waiting for you." Naomi nodded. "I know." The first paramedic rushed onto the plane, immediately going to Thomas Price in row 37. Naomi joined them, giving a quick status briefing. Pain in the middle of the chest radiating to the back, numbness in the left arm, low blood pressure, rapid heart rate. No loss of consciousness, no convulsions. The paramedic nodded vigorously, placing the monitor on Thomas's chest. "Yes, we received it." Thomas's girlfriend hugs Naomi. "Ma'am, you saved him." Naomi squeezed the girl's hand gently. "Go with him. He needs someone by his side." The girl burst into tears again and ran after the paramedic. As Thomas was taken down on a stretcher, the cabin let out a small applause, not out of ceremony but out of relief. For life. Naomi watched them go. She felt a mixture of sadness, joy, and relief for a moment. As she walked toward the exit, Naomi saw 2 FAA employees waiting, a man in his 52nds wearing a yellow FAA logo jacket and a younger woman wearing a name tag reading Alicia Werner. The man stepped forward, holding a notebook. "Commissioner Caldwell." Naomi nodded. "I am Director Harold Mason, Flight Safety Division." Daniel Rodriguez also just walked to the door, sweat still on his forehead, but his eyes were brighter and more self-possessed than before. Harold glanced at Daniel. "Are you First Officer Rodriguez?" Daniel nodded. "Yes, sir." Harold wrote quickly in his notebook, then looked at Naomi again, his voice more solemn. "We have received your urgent report. We will need all 3 of you, First Officer Rodriguez and Captain Huxley, out of the vehicle to make your report immediately." Naomi nodded. "Of course." Paula stood a little behind, worried. "Ma'am, do you need me to come with you?" Naomi turned back, placing her hand on Paula's arm. "Thank you, but no need. This part is my responsibility." Paula bit her lip, then bowed her head. "I know." Naomi walked down the metal stairs. The Washington, D.C. night wind blew through her shirt, a little chilly but with the feeling that the ground was actually touching her feet. Below, the lights from the ambulance reflected on the road. The radio footsteps and the sound of car doors opening and closing continuously. Daniel followed closely behind, his expression a mixture of exhaustion and relief. Behind him is Captain Grant Huxley. No one said anything, but Naomi turned to look at him. Huxley walked down the steps slowly, no longer arrogant, no longer with the forceful stride he had had when he had pushed Naomi off seat 1A. His shoulders slumped slightly. His eyes were fixed on the steps, not daring to look at anyone. Naomi felt a slight pang in her heart. This man destroyed his career in minutes. She sighed, then turned away. She couldn't let sympathy take over now. Director Harold Mason opens the SUV door. "Commissioner Caldwell, please come in first." Naomi stepped inside. The car was filled with recording equipment, small screens, and FAA documents. Daniel got into the back seat. Huxley sat across from Daniel in a separate chair, like the one reserved for someone in need of supervision. The lights in the car dimmed as the door closed. The room was silent, so much so that Naomi could hear the loose belt on Huxley's jacket vibrating slightly with his breathing. Harold opened the book. "Okay, here we go. Commissioner Caldwell, you're the first to report. You can give us the full story." Naomi nodded, taking a deep breath. She recounts from the beginning, being forced to leave seat 1A, how Captain Huxley allowed VIP Logan Pierce into the cockpit, Huxley's lack of sleep, pitch axis fault, turbulence, her being forced to relieve the captain, and the decision, to request priority landing because of the passengers' distress. She told clearly, concisely, without adding or subtracting emotions. When Naomi stopped, Harold said, "Thank you, Commissioner. Very detailed." He turned to Daniel. "Now it's your turn, Rodriguez. Describe Captain Huxley's condition at that time." Daniel swallowed, respectful but not evasive. "Grant, Captain Huxley was unstable from the first turbulence. He got distracted and let Mr. Pierce stand close to the controls. I had to hold the plane manually when the autopilot disconnected, and I think if Commissioner Caldwell hadn't been there, the situation could have been more dangerous." Mason recorded it all. Finally, he looked at Huxley. "Captain Huxley, what do you have to say?" The space was silent. Huxley raised his head. His eyes were tired, but what surprised Naomi most was the sincerity in them. "I was wrong." The words were hoarse, weak, but true. "I was tired. I tried to fly even though I knew I didn't have enough rest. I wanted to help Pierce because of the relationship. I lost focus, and..." He stopped, not daring to look at Naomi. "I misjudged you. Seriously. I apologize, Commissioner." Naomi sat silently. No smile, no nod, no look of victory. Huxley pursed his lips, then continued, "If Rodriguez hadn't been there, if she hadn't been there, maybe the flight would have ended differently." Naomi looked straight at him. "Captain, you not only misjudged me, you misjudged your own responsibility." Huxley bowed his head. Harold closed his pen. "We will be detaining Captain Huxley for formal questioning. Commissioner Caldwell, First Officer Rodriguez, you two will be brought to the office to sign the report." Naomi nodded. Before getting out of the car, she looked at Huxley one more time. He looked after her, his eyes desperate but unusually calm, like someone who had finally accepted that everything had to be returned to its rightful place. Naomi said softly enough for him to hear, "I hope you know, no one is happy to see someone lose their entire career." Huxley closed his eyes slightly. "Even I never thought I would fall to this level." Naomi said nothing more. She opened the door and stepped down. On the tarmac, passengers were directed to a holding area. Some recognized Naomi and applauded as she passed. An elderly woman said to her husband, "That was her, the one who saved the flight." Naomi did not react, just bowed her head slightly. Paula ran to "Ma'am, they said Thomas Price's blood pressure is stable, he's awake." Naomi smiled slightly for the second time that day. "Good, very good." Paula looked at her, her voice filled with emotion. "You are truly unlike anyone I have ever met, Naomi." Naomi replied, "I just did the right thing." Paula shook her head and smiled. "The right thing sometimes requires courage. Not everyone dares." Naomi squeezed Paula's hand gently. "Thank you. Director Mason calls Commissioner Caldwell. Please." Naomi nodded, turned, and walked towards the temporary office next to the runway. She knows well, the flight is over, but the real battle, the battle for justice, has just begun, and she was willing to step into it. The temporary investigation room was located in the secure area of Dulles Airport. There were no windows. There was no clock on the wall. Only the cold white fluorescent light fell on the long metal table, creating a sharp streak of light, dividing the room into two different bands of light and dark. Naomi entered first. She was tall and steady, her black coat still neatly folded despite the turbulent flight. Daniel followed close behind, his expression more serious than usual, while Captain Huxley was ushered in last under the watchful eyes of two airport security guards. When the door closed, the small room seemed to suffocate. Director Harold Mason sat at the head of the desk, a thick file in front of him, a neon yellow highlighter pinned to the first page. Beside him was Alicia Werner, her hands on her laptop keyboard, her eyes steady. Harold looked up. "Please sit down." Naomi sat on the left side of the table, Daniel on the right. Huxley sat opposite Daniel. His face was pale, his hands were clenched, his fingers trembling slightly. Harold opens the document. "Before we begin, let me reiterate, this is a preliminary hearing. It is all being recorded." There is no intention to indict here, but all information will be forwarded directly to the FAA and the Department of Transportation. Naomi nodded. Daniel nodded. Only Huxley didn't move. Harold looked at Naomi. Commissioner Caldwell, I want to ask you first. Can you describe the exact moment you decided to relieve Captain Huxley from his position? Naomi replied directly, her voice calm, but each word carrying weight. When I entered the cockpit, Captain Huxley was clearly inattentive. He had allowed a passenger, Mr. Logan Pierce, to stand too close to the controls and was affecting the stability of the flight. The autopilot had disconnected, the pitch system had malfunctioned, and I observed that he was showing signs of severe fatigue. Harold nodded slightly, pen touching paper. How did he react when you made the decision? He resisted. But then, under Emergency Regulation 44B authority, I appointed First Officer Rodriguez as the primary controller. Alicia wrote down every word. Daniel interjected as if to confirm Ma'am saved the plane. I'm not exaggerating. At that point, Captain Huxley was no longer capable of making stable decisions. Harold looked at Daniel. Are you sure about this, Daniel? Straightened his back. Certainly, sir. Harold turned his gaze to Huxley. Captain Huxley, would you like to respond? Huxley opened his mouth, but his voice caught in his throat. He took a breath, then tried again. I am tired. I won't deny that, but I don't want to cause harm. I think I'm still in control. Naomi looked at him, her eyes not cold but uncompromising. Captain, because you think you're fine, you no longer realize you're putting yourself at risk. Huxley jerked slightly, as if her words had hit the spot where it hurt most. Harold turned the page. There is one other point, the putting of Mr. Pierce in the cockpit. How do you explain it? Huxley swallowed hard, his eyes still not daring to look straight at Naomi or Daniel. He was an acquaintance of mine, and I thought it was just a minute. Nobody touched anything. Harold put down his pen. In the cockpit voice recorder, we heard him say he wanted to see how the controls feel. At the same time, the pitch deviation warning system detected a 0.7 degrees deviation at the same time as the voice appeared. The room was silent as stone. Daniel whispered the plane was really skewed at that time. Harold looked at Naomi. Commissioner Caldwell, what do you think that action represents? Naomi replied without hesitation. Lack of responsibility, and the risk of flight safety. Huxley clenched his fists so hard his knuckles turned white. He looked up at Naomi, his eyes no longer defensive but remorseful. Mrs. Caldwell, I know I was wrong. I know. I put people in danger. But I've been flying for 25 years. I've never let anyone get hurt. Naomi looked at him. Her eyes weren't as sharp as they had been in the cockpit. They were softer. But the truth had to be told. You almost got 216 people hurt today, Grant. His name was spoken by her, not by title, not by formalities, but as if reminding him of his true self. Huxley bowed his head. A tear fell onto the back of his hand. No one spoke. Not out of spite, but because it was a moment when a man faced a truth he had denied for so long. Harold continued. Now to the technical matter. First Officer Rodriguez. Daniel sat up straight, his voice serious. Sir, can you describe the difficulty of flying an airplane with a pitch axis error? Daniel thought for a few seconds. Very difficult, sir. I say days. The plane is responding faster than normal. Any turbulence is amplified, and Captain is not of assistance. Harold asked, what if Commissioner Caldwell isn't here today? Daniel looked at Naomi, then at Harold. I think the system will overload, and I will lose control. Alicia looked at Daniel, her eyes widening slightly, for the words carried real weight. Naomi put her hand on Daniel's shoulder and squeezed it gently. You did better than you thought. Daniel exhaled as if he had released something. Harold clasped his hands together. Okay, we've heard enough to make a report. Commissioner Caldwell, you will be asked to give formal testimony before the FAA board in the next 48 hours. First Officer Rodriguez, you will be asked to do the same. He turned to Huxley. Captain Huxley, you will be suspended from flying pending investigation. Huxley closed his eyes, as if he had expected it, but the pain was still like a knife cutting. Harold stood up. Thank you all three. This interview is over for now. The staff opened the door. As Naomi stood up, Huxley called softly, Commissioner. Naomi stopped and turned around. Huxley stood up, his arms hanging down, his voice lower than the air conditioner. I am sorry, truly. Naomi was silent for a few seconds, then said very slowly, Grant, making mistakes is not the end of a man, but not facing them is. Huxley looked at her, eyes red. Naomi continued, you faced it. That was the first step. Huxley bowed his head. Thank you. Give me some last dignity. Naomi looked at him long, then nodded slightly. She did not speak as commissioner, not as a victim, but as someone who has had to stand up to a lot of injustice in life, and sometimes even the wrong person needs someone to tell them that they still have a way to get back to being a decent person. Naomi walked out of the interrogation room, Daniel beside her. Both were silent. As the door closed behind him, Daniel asked softly, Ma'am, are you tired? Naomi smiled slightly, a rare but genuine smile. I've been through worse things than this. Daniel chuckled. Naomi looked down the long white hallway, the lights reflecting off the glossy tiles. In her mind a thought flashed. The flight has landed, but the fight for justice, for the defenseless, has not. And Naomi Caldwell, the woman who was overlooked for sitting in seat 1A, is ready to move on. The airport corridor leading to the arrivals area was lit with warm yellow lights, a stark contrast to the cold air in the interrogation room. Naomi stepped out gently, pulling her coat back into place. Daniel followed closely behind, glancing at her from time to time as if afraid she would collapse from exhaustion. But Naomi remained steadfast. She always was. At the end of the corridor, Paula Green, the chief flight attendant, was waiting. When she saw Naomi, she immediately rushed over, her eyes tense. Commissioner, are you okay? Naomi put her hand on Paula's arm, her voice soft and warm. I'm fine. How about you? I see you've kept your composure very well. Paula almost burst into tears at the recognition. I really thought the plane would crash. If it weren't for you and Daniel. Naomi smiled. A smile that was both gentle and strong. We're here. And we're alive. That means we have work to do. Paula nodded vigorously, though her eyes were red. 3 people walked out to the lobby to greet guests. And at that moment Naomi stopped. Daniel stopped too. Paula was stunned. In front of them, right in the middle of the check-in area, were dozens of people, reporters from major newspapers. Cameras, microphones, flashbulbs were constantly flashing. Someone leaked news of the incident. A man in a gray suit stepped forward, raised the microphone and said loudly, Commissioner Caldwell, did you personally take Captain Huxley's command in the air? Another reporter chimed in. Was SkyContinental Flight 217 nearly shot down due to pilot error? A female reporter shouted, were you discriminated against before this happened? The last question sent a jolt through the room. Cameras shot up. The camera zoomed in on Naomi. Paula whispered, do you want to get out of here? I can call security. But Naomi did not back down. She looked at the stream of reporters like she looked at a stormy sea, without fear, just quietly assessing where the waves were coming from. Daniel spoke up, his voice low but firm. Ma'am, don't answer here. They will twist your words. Naomi turned to him. Daniel, I am commissioner and CEO. I am used to storms. Naomi took a step forward. The microphone was turned on. Someone shouted, Mrs. Caldwell, please answer. Are you treated differently because you are a black woman? Naomi paused for just a beat, long enough to catch everyone's eyes, then said in a calm but resonant voice, what happened today is not a story about skin color. It is a story about responsibility and safety of 216 people. The reporters were silent for a second, a rare one because the answer was not what they expected. Naomi continued, "I will cooperate fully, but I will not turn a serious incident into entertainment or a sensational story." Another person interrupted, his voice sharp. "There are reports that SkyContinental knew Captain Huxley was tired but still let him fly. Do you have any comment?" Naomi looked at the nearest camera, not avoiding. "I will just say this. Anyone who puts profit above passenger safety will be held accountable." The crowd erupted in sound. Flashes flashed. Chatter rose like a swarm of bees. Daniel stood next to Naomi, his heart pounding in his chest. He had never seen anyone face such a huge media crowd with such composure, maybe because she had to fight worse things than the camera. Maybe because she was pushed out of boardrooms simply because she was a black woman. Perhaps because she was used to having to protect herself even when she was alone. A reporter asked Mrs. Caldwell, "Are you going to sue the airline?" Naomi replied gently, "I don't sue anyone. I let the facts do that." A group of security guards moved forward to clear a path for Naomi and Daniel out of the area. As they made their way through the crowd, Naomi heard a woman's voice calling from the back row. "Thank you, Commissioner. My daughter is a flight attendant. Thanks to you, she's alive." Naomi turned around but saw no one in particular, just someone's arm raised in the crowd. And that made her heart clench. Because sometimes just one sentence like that is enough for a woman to continue to walk through years of being looked down upon. When Naomi was brought to the pickup area, she let out a long sigh. Daniel opened the door of the black SUV for her, but Naomi didn't get in right away. "I need a few minutes," she said. Daniel nodded, taking a few steps back to give her some space. Naomi looked up at the night sky above the airport roof. The lights of Washington reflected off the low clouds, creating a pale orange-yellow color like smoke. She closed her eyes for a moment. A long day, a terrifying flight, a grueling interrogation, and now a media storm is brewing. Daniel approached. "Ma'am, are you okay?" Naomi opened her eyes, smiling slightly but sincerely. "Daniel, sometimes I wonder how long it will take for people to believe that a black woman can do her job as well as anyone else." Daniel was silent, a silence filled with deep respect. Naomi continued, "But then, I thought of people like the little girl who had just called out to me in the crowd, and I remembered I must not be tired." Daniel bowed his head. "Ma'am, you really are the one who saved us." Naomi looked at him for a long time, then slowly said, "No, Daniel, we save each other." Naomi's phone rang softly. "Caller Mira Caldwell." Her daughter Naomi smoothed out her call, her voice softening. "Honey, I'm listening." Mira's voice rang out, trembling slightly. "Mom, I just saw the news. Did something happen to your plane? Are you safe?" Naomi leaned against the car door, her voice full of affection. "I'm safe. I'm at the airport. It's okay. I was so scared. I thought I lost my mother." Naomi smiled, a rare smile reserved only for girls. "Mom still has to see you graduate from college. Mom is not going anywhere. Mom, I love you." "Mother loves you more, girl." Naomi ended the call. In return, a strange sense of peace descended. Daniel stood a few steps away, watching silently. He had never seen Naomi Caldwell like this, gentle, warm, very human. He suddenly understood. Her strength did not come from power or position. It came from love, experience, perseverance, and the belief that she had a responsibility to the weaker people. Harold Mason stepped out of the back door and approached them. "Commissioner Caldwell, there's something you need to see." He handed her a black envelope. Naomi opened it. Inside was a fax from the Department of Transportation office. Just a few short lines, but Naomi's eyes stopped at an invisible point after reading it. Daniel worried. "Ma'am, what's wrong?" Naomi folded the paper. "Daniel, this is much bigger than I thought. SkyContinental, may have been covering up a series of violations over the past 3 years. Daniel gasped. You mean, today's incident is just the tip of the iceberg? Naomi nodded. And that iceberg is heading straight for us. A cold night wind blew through the pickup area. Naomi squeezed the facts lightly in her hand. One flight is over, but a much bigger battle is beginning. It was late. The Dulles airport lobby was quieter than usual, save for the last taxis rolling in, and the cold wind carried the metallic scent of the tarmac. Naomi leaned lightly against the black SUV, her hand still clutching the facts. Daniel stood a few feet away, his eyes trained on her as if waiting for something serious to happen. Harold Mason, his face as heavy as lead, stepped back, giving Naomi space to reread the words in the dim streetlight. Naomi read very slowly, not because she didn't understand, but because she understood too well. This is the kind of document that people often try to keep out of public hands. The facts stated 3 things. 1. SkyContinental has been suspected of reducing pilot rest hours over the past 3 years. 2. Some fatigue reports were edited before being submitted to the FAA. 3. Part of the crew data was manually deleted shortly before flight SC-217 took off. Daniel asked, his voice low, almost a whisper. Ma'am, they really do that? Naomi didn't answer right away. She took a deep breath, then folded the paper. When a big company, an airline, a corporation, starts to believe that it is too important to be responsible, it will do anything to hide the truth. Daniel swallowed. Everything that had happened on the flight, turbulence, autopilot drift, Captain Huxley's exhaustion, was just the surface. Paula came closer, her voice full of worry. Commissioner, are we in danger? Naomi looked at her, her eyes softening. Not yet, but maybe. Paula blinked. Why? Naomi replied, her voice low, drawing out each word. Because the truth always scares those who live by money. The 3 of them got into the car. Daniel sat in the front seat, Naomi in the back. Paula still didn't dare leave them. Harold decided to follow in the back car just in case something happened. As the car pulled away from the airport, Naomi leaned her head back in her seat and closed her eyes. Not because she was simply tired, but because her thoughts were beginning to pile up layer upon layer like storm clouds. How should I handle this? Will it reach a political level? Could it affect my daughter? She was unshakable but not iron. Her composure was honed by decades of doubting looks, nagging words, and rooms she had fought to enter. Paula turned back and saw that Naomi had been silent for too long, so she asked, Ma'am, if they've been hiding it for 3 years? How much more do you think is underneath? Naomi opened her eyes, her gaze fixed on the person-hap ceiling of the car. This iceberg is bigger than we thought. Daniel said, I think the company can fight back. They have lawyers, money, and political connections. Naomi looked out the window. The streetlights passed by like a blur. That's why they are even more afraid of people who don't need money, don't need favors, don't need silence. Daniel looked at her with deep admiration. She's the kind of person they can't buy. Naomi smiled briefly. Daniel, when you get a little older you will understand. A man who was looked down upon so much had nothing left to lose but the truth. When the car stopped at a temporary federal office complex because the incident needed to be kept secret, Harold was waiting. He gave Naomi a new security badge. You'll need this. The system is restricting access to prevent leaks. Naomi glanced at the card, then asked Harold, Does anyone else know about this fax? Just a few, and we want to keep it that way. Naomi stepped into the building, her shoes clicking on the marble floor. Steady, slow, sure, like the heartbeat of someone preparing for a long battle. The mini Situation Room was smaller than the one at Washington HQ, but still had monitors, servers, and data panels. A young technician ran up. Commissioner Caldwell, we pulled a copy of the backup log from SkyContinental's secondary server. They may have forgotten to delete this copy. Naomi smiled slightly, a sort of displeased smile but with a hint of bitterness. They don't forget. They think we don't know where to look. The technician handed her the laptop. Naomi opened a backup file. Daniel stood behind her. Harold and Alicia Werner stood on either side. On the screen is a list of modified fatigue reports. Some were changed from severe fatigue to minor inconvenience. Some were removed from the system entirely. But the most notable thing is a red data line denoted by flag SR5 Captain Grant Huxley 14 reports flagged. Alicia frowned. 14 reports, so the company has known Huxley had problems for a long time. Naomi slowly nodded. And they still let him fly. Daniel could not help. They know he's tired. They know he's dangerous. And yet they force him to fly. Naomi turned her chair around and looked straight at Daniel. They don't force. Daniel paused. Naomi continued, her voice slow and deep. They created a culture where pilots thought they weren't allowed to rest. They weren't allowed to admit they were tired. They weren't allowed to be weak. A culture where, if you complained, you were seen as the problem, Paula whispered, like every other major company. Naomi looked at her eyes, painful but true. Correct. Alicia, said Mrs. Caldwell, if this gets out, SkyContinental will collapse. Naomi replied, if they build on silence and fear, they will collapse. A soft beep sounded. The technician reported, there's an email sent to your secure account, ma'am. Naomi opened the email. Just one sentence. Don't touch us. For your daughter's sake. No signature. No real return address. Just a naked threat. Daniel saw Naomi's face change color. Ma'am, what did they say? Naomi turned off her laptop screen. Her voice was very small, so small it was lost in the sound of the air conditioner. They were targeting Mira. Paula put her hand to her mouth. Oh my God. Harold stepped forward. Naomi, I will have someone protect your daughter immediately. But Naomi shook her head. No. Don't let them think I'm scared. Daniel's eyes widened. Ma'am, they are threatening your family. Naomi looked at him. One look made Daniel stand still as if nailed to the ground. Daniel, those who wish to conceal the truth always increase their threats when they understand that the person they threaten has never submitted. Daniel bit his lip. I am just afraid they will hurt someone, Naomi replied. Fear only has power when we let it speak for us. Today, it is not allowed to speak. The room fell silent, a leaden silence, because everyone understood this was no longer an aviation accident. This is war, between the truth and the system that tries to hide it, between the powerful and a black woman who dared to stand up, between the power of money and the power of conscience. And Naomi, despite being tired, despite worrying about her daughter, despite knowing the danger ahead, still sat up straight, her eyes shining like steel. Alicia said softly, Commissioner, what do you want to do next? Naomi placed her hand on the table, her fingers tapping 3 times. Her voice was not loud, but it carried far. We are launching a full investigation. Harold nodded vigorously. I will grant full access. Naomi stood up and adjusted her coat. And we'll start tonight. Daniel looked at her. There was unprecedented respect in his eyes. Ma'am, I'm going with you. Paula took a step forward. Me too. Harold smiled. The entire FAA team is behind you. Naomi looked at each person, feeling a new, strong, and very real flow of energy. Thank you all. But remember, we are not fighting for power, not for fame, not for the press. We are doing this for those in the economy, those who have no one to defend them, because they have no voice, and we must be that voice. Daniel whispered. Yes, ma'am. Naomi looked at the screen where dozens of hidden reports lit up. Then she said the closing line, the line that people would remember her by for years to come. Let's get started. The truth doesn't come to light on its own. We have to drag it out. 2 weeks after the SC-217 incident, the skies over Washington were a pale winter gray. There was no snow, but the cold wind that crept through the streets, hitting people in the face, reminded them that the capital had never been a soft place for anyone. The Federal Aviation Administration building is ablaze with lights. It's a public hearing. And it's not just the press. The public is waiting too. SC-217 has been making headlines with debates about power discrimination, toxic culture cover-up, and the responsibility of a multi-billion-dollar airline. Naomi stood in the preparation room and took a deep breath. She wore a crisp black blazer, her hair pulled back in a bun, her face still calm but her eyes deep and steely. Not because she was about to speak to the media, but because she was about to tell the truth that so many people had tried to hide. Daniel walked in, adjusting his dark blue tie, looking tense but determined. "Ma'am, there are so many of them. The press is packed all over the hallway." Naomi smiled slightly. "Daniel, people only fear the light when they are used to living in the dark. We are not of that group." Paula appeared with a document in her arms. "Miss Caldwell, the documents the company is trying to hide, we have them in chronological order, and we have a former employee willing to come forward as a witness." Naomi nodded, her eyes warming a bit. "Good. We don't fight alone." Harold Mason walked into the room, his hand on a thick file. "Naomi, today you will change an entire industry." Naomi looked at him very clearly. "I don't want to change the industry. I just want to change what's wrong." Harold smiled a smile of respect. "That is why you are respected." As the hearing room door opened, Naomi walked in. The room was packed. The benches were packed with reporters. Cameras were trained on her. The white light from dozens of spotlights made the room as bright as day. In the front row, Daniel sat upright. Paula sat next to him. Alicia Werner had her notepad ready. Harold Mason stood behind her as silent support. Sitting across from Naomi were SkyContinental Airlines representatives, 3 men in expensive suits, their eyes cold and tense. One of them was Victor Hale, the company's executive vice president. His face couldn't hide his displeasure when Naomi appeared. He leaned slightly toward the lawyer and whispered, his eyes never leaving her. Naomi sat down in the witness chair. The microphone was turned on. The room was silent. The hearing chairwoman, Miss Ruth Noland, lightly tapped the gavel. "The Aviation Safety Inquiry and Investigation into the SkyContinental Flight 217 incident has officially begun. Commissioner Naomi Caldwell is invited to speak." Naomi nodded and spoke. Her voice was low and clear, not shaky, not stiff, but with the confidence of someone who knew very well what she was saying and to whom. "Thank you, Chairman Noland. I am not here today to tell a personal story. I am here to talk about something larger. The culture of responsibility, or rather, the lack of responsibility in the commercial aviation system." The room was in a stir. Naomi continued, "I want to start with the simplest thing. Pilots are human. They get tired. They are exhausted. They have limits. But when an airline repeatedly dismisses fatigue as a minor nuisance and edits reports to hide it, they are putting millions of passengers at risk." A reporter in the back row whispered, "She's going straight to the heart of the matter." Naomi opened the file. "Here's the evidence. Over the past 3 years, SkyContinental has received at least 57 reports of serious fatigue from pilots, but only 12 reports were submitted to the FAA in their entirety. The rest were edited or deleted." Victor Hale stood up. "Objection. Those documents have not been verified." The chairman banged his gavel. "Sit down, Mr. Hale. The document has been approved by the FAA." The whole room erupted in murmurs. Naomi remained calm. "Among the altered reports, 14 belonged to Captain Grant Huxley." A wave of whispers spread across the room. Daniel bowed his head slightly. "Huxley, though wrong, was a victim of a bad system." Naomi continued, "I'm not here to defend Captain Huxley. He must take responsibility for his actions, but the truth is, he should never have been allowed to take off that day, and the airline knew it." Naomi's eyes turned to Victor Hale. For the first time their eyes met. One side was the power of money. The other side was the power of truth. Naomi opens the system log screenshot. Here's proof the airline deleted Huxley's fatigue report at 2 a.m. before the flight and replaced it with the status, "fit to fly." There was a loud roar. Naomi did not stop. SkyContinental didn't just hide the truth. They created an environment where pilots were afraid to report their own fatigue, an environment where people believed human health was negotiable. Naomi placed each page of documents on the table, her voice slowing down like a cold, sharp knife. And so, the 216 men on SC 217 placed their lives in the hands of a man so exhausted he could not fly the plane. The room was silent. A female congresswoman leans forward asking Commissioner Caldwell, "At the time you entered the cockpit, did you believe the passengers' lives were in danger?" Naomi replied, without hesitation, "Yes. I believe that if I had not relieved Captain Huxley at that moment, the plane would have gone out of control." The female congresswoman nodded, then asked the next question, "So why did you choose to speak up, even though you knew this would make you a target of the media and the underground power?" Naomi looked straight at the congresswoman. Her voice was low, calm as a confession, but loud enough for the whole room to hear. Because there were people on that flight, no one to protect them. People sitting in economy, people who didn't know the pilots were exhausted, people who didn't know the airline was covering up. I couldn't keep them quiet. I was one of them. A moved sigh came from the back seat. In that moment, Naomi was no longer a federal commissioner or a CEO. She was a black woman who had been treated unfairly too many times, and she stood there to speak for those who had no voice. After nearly 2 hours of questioning, Chairman Noland banged the gavel. "We are adjourning. The board will make a decision within 14 days. Naomi stepped down. Daniel jumped up and ran to her. "Ma'am, you did well," Paula said softly, her eyes still red. "I've never heard anyone say that. No one." Naomi smiled tiredly. "I'm just telling the truth." Harold stepped forward and put his hand on her shoulder. "Naomi, whatever the outcome, today you have made history." Naomi looked at him, her eyes both sad and warm. "Harold, I don't care about history. I just want people like Huxley not to be thrown into cockpits when they're no longer strong enough." Harold nodded. He understood. Naomi had always been like that. 2 weeks later, the results were announced. SkyContinental was fined $19.4 million for covering up safety violations. The entire executive board was forced to resign. The airline had to rebuild its fatigue reporting system from scratch. Captain Huxley permanently banned from flying but receiving medical assistance from the FAA for chronic fatigue. Naomi Caldwell was cited before Congress for courageous actions to protect public safety. That day, Naomi left the Capitol building with Mira by her side. Her daughter held her hand tightly. "Mom, I'm so proud of you." Naomi looked at her child, her smile as gentle as the rare winter sunshine. "Mira, I only did what I thought was right." Mira leaned her head on her shoulder. "That's what makes a mother the strongest." The car was waiting ahead. The wind was still cold, but Naomi felt warm inside, because sometimes just one person standing up is enough to change an entire system. And sometimes it's the truth that holds people together. Naomi got into the car, closed the door, and let out a small breath. This war is not final, but she is no longer afraid. Because in the end, she learned that when you stand for the truth, you never stand alone. Naomi Caldwell's story is more than just an airplane incident. It's a mirror of what so many of us silently endure: the belittling, the invisible judgments, the pressure to stay silent and keep things running smoothly. But Naomi shows us something important. Silence can sometimes breed wrongdoing, and courage, even from just one person, can change a system. At every age, we have had moments when we were judged based on our appearance, our circumstances, or our social position. However, the value of each person is not in the chair they sit on, but in how they stand up when faced with injustice. This story reminds that times no one has the right to take away your dignity. Asterisk. The truth always needs defenders. Asterisk. Integrity is something that cannot be bought with money or power. Asterisk. Fear only wins when we choose silence. And most of all, it gives us hope that no matter how unfair the world is, if just one person dares to do what is right, we can all step into the light stronger and kinder. Thank you for taking the time to follow this powerful story. I hope Naomi's journey has touched a place deep within you, a place that believes in justice, in kindness, and in the courage to stand up when needed. If you feel this story is valuable to you, please like, share, and subscribe to the channel. That is the best way for us to continue bringing you true, humane, and inspiring stories. Are you ready for the next story?